Mm. Thank you. Hi, good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting. My name is Councillor Jacqueline Daly. I am Chair of the Housing and Homelessness Policy and Accountability Committee. There are, before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping points. First of all, this meeting is being live streamed on YouTube. So by taking part, you're consenting to be recorded. And I'd like to ask everybody if they can remember to use the microphones so that people at home can hear the conversations. Can officers please introduce themselves before the first time they speak? Just say what your area is. And if the fire alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting and officers will direct us to the assembly point out on Shortlands Road. Finally, there are tea, coffee, biscuits at the back, and the toilets are in the lift lobby. So let's proceed to the agenda. I have...
It's a point of notice. Can I just check? As we're not forward, can we actually start? Is it... It's 3 at a time. Just checking because I want to be sure.
Thanks, Debbie. So I have apologies for lateness from Councillor Sadiq, who will be here very shortly. And apologies received from Councillor Taylor, who can't join us this evening. Do members have any declarations of interest? Okay. So can I ask, do members agree to the meetings, the minutes of the last meeting from the 25th of July? Agreed. All right, lovely. Thank you. There are 3 main items this evening. Before we do move on to those, I'd like to ask John Pixton if he'd like to introduce the agenda this evening.
Thanks, Councillor Daly. So I'm John Pixton, Strategic Director of the Economy Department, which includes housing. Just in terms of, I suppose, the theme this evening, we got 3 quite distinct reports on homelessness, on complaints handling, and on retrofit strategy. But I think what's in common between them is that we're dealing here with sort of national level challenges that are affecting many local authorities, in fact, most local authorities across the country, and also the kind of spirit of partnership and the holistic approach we're taking to meeting those challenges. So, I mean, in terms of homelessness, London Council's report that there's 170,000 people in the capital in temporary accommodation. That figure's gone up by about 11% on the previous year. So that's about 1 in 50 Londoners, includes 83,000 children. And quite shockingly, that's roughly about 1 child per classroom. The number of rough sleepers in London has gone up by about 1/3, according to central government figures, year on year as well. So there is a real homelessness crisis in London. And this is affecting councils in terms of the services needed, and notably in terms of temporary accommodation. The LGA has reported recently that in the last financial year, £1.74 billion was spent on temporary accommodation by councils across England. And that's a record since 1998, when records began. So the LGA has asked central government to look at local housing allowances, the ability of council set rent over a longer period, to have more council homes, and our ability to invest in homes as part of a holistic package to help local authorities drive forward changes in this. And this was echoed by a letter into government from the district councils recently, which also highlighted the enormous financial pressure they face, as many councils who argue that despite being well financially managed, they're now facing potential Section 114 notices and having to ask central government for financial support because of the sheer burden of temporary accommodation. So very, very challenging issue. I think next on complaints, the work of the Housing Ombudsman, and there's been quite a lot of media coverage there about complaint handling, particularly in respect to repairs across a number of different councils and also registered social landlords in the UK. So this is quite a common issue across England. And thirdly, I don't think the climate change and ecological emergency needs much introduction. We're all very aware of the issues that not only this country but the world faces there. So that spirit of partnership, we're hearing from Roy in terms of homelessness and the work that housing management and the wider housing service are doing there, but that also overlaps with children's services, with health, with adult social care, and with external bodies like the NHS. In terms of complaints, there's been great focus on complaint management in the council. So bringing together rather splintered parts of housing service into a much more coherent whole and a stronger sense of partnership, supported, through a service improvement board that myself and Richard, the Director of Housing, attend to ensure that build strong leadership there. And then the partnership around the retrofit strategy is clear, whether it's the regeneration team, the climate change unit, or people who work on capital programs in housing, ensuring that that's well planned in terms of kind of fabric first approach and a response to emissions, to energy efficiency, to fuel poverty, to climate change, to the ecological emergency in our buildings and also the surrounding land on estates. So there's a lot of work going on in planning that strategy and how that agenda fits in with socioeconomic agendas like fuel poverty and also with wider retrofit works to ensure that we give good quality homes to our residents. So that's what I kind of wanted to say, that in summary, we are facing in H&F issues that many other councils across the country are facing. As a big national issues, and our work is founded on this kind of partnership and holistic kind of strategy across the council and beyond. So thank you.
Thank you very much, John. So our first report is on homelessness prevention, and it's an update. And Roy Morgan is presenting, I think. Roy, can I pass to you?
Yeah, hi everybody. So I'm assuming everybody's read the report, but I will just give a high-level overview. So basically, the report sort of gives a background overview of our statutory framework of homelessness, the legislation of the Part 7 Act, and also the Homeless Reduction Act, which came into force. To just give you an overview of my service areas, which I'm responsible for. So in the Housing and Homelessness Service, there is the H&F Link team. We have a Homeless Assessment and Prevention team and a Rough Sleeping team, and we have the Neighbourhood Services. The H&F Link team provides advice basically to vulnerable residents, basically providing support around managing budgets, looking at discretionary housing benefits, and looking at tenancy sustainment support, and referring residents to our BEAM, one of our partnership organisations around training, employment skills, and also looking at the private sector rented move-on for those who are potentially being evicted and can't stay where they are, as well as floating support services. The Homeless Assessment Team, which delivers Part 7 of the Housing Act, they are actually there to sort of do the early interventions where residents are coming through 145 King Street or through by telephone or by email, whichever access channel, where they are presenting themselves as homeless. That team will do an assessment to establish how they've actually got into that situation and work with them to see if they can do some interventions with the existing landlord or to assess their situation. It's a real challenge, and we are seeing a great demand on the service, and people who are presenting themselves are very vulnerable. There's a mixture of single people, elderly people, etc. But it is very challenging with the team from carrying out the assessment and trying to get the right information in order to make the right decision within the statutory guidelines of the 56 days. As a result of that, we have had a backlog, and the team, we've put extra resources in to support clearing that backlog, because we want to make sure that we are making the right assessment, the right solution to support those individual residents. In addition to that, we have the rough sleeping team, and again, that is, we have a commission service work with Set Mungos in order to make sure any rough sleepers that have been identified around the borough. We have we work with our agencies to make sure we prevent those people from rough sleep and put the relevant wraparound support services. There are some usual frequent rough sleepers presenting themselves in the borough where they have refused to take the support services. And Lucy Baker works very closely with the teams to make sure those who are high risk, to make sure they are off the streets, etc. I would like to put a caveat to that because perceptions can be people's reality. Lucy works really, really hard to make sure that we don't have rough sleepers lying around, but it is down to the rough sleepers to make the decisions whether they want to have the relevant support services. 9 out of 10, some of them don't want to have their support services. I think we touched on this before because their community is being with the other rough sleepers associated, and we have a very transient amount of people coming into the borough who are rough sleepers, which is what's happening across the borough. In addition to that, the neighbourhood services, which is the housing officers team, they work very closely with the homelessness and prevention team, and they are doing home visits, part of tenancy sign-ups, really to try and see what additional support residents need in order as early warnings as intervention, actually to see signposting and seeing what other benefits or services residents may well need to prevent them from falling into financial hardship. We also work very closely with Paul Hayward's team in the rents team as well, where residents are falling into arrears, for example, is to look at how we can prevent them to sustain their tenancy and look at what other support services are available. Just to sort of give you, there's a graph there which gives you sort of an overview from last year to this year, and it's up to August, but you can see the increase in demand. We have seen a 21% increase in demand of homelessness. Just to sort of say, for August this year, there was 45 more people presenting themselves as homeless compared to the previous year. And again, based on, we've had, last year we had 2,599 homeless approaches the last financial year. And for the last few months, we've had 1,323, and which is about 274 increase of more people presented them coming through the front doors being homeless. Our homeless prevention staff, some of the work, just to give you a bit more of an overview, as I mentioned, we have the H&F link. They are working very closely with our residents, and they continue to support the caseloads of referrals that are coming through. We've supported 63 households since April this year, and we've done a lot of preventative stuff working with the landlords, which can be very difficult. So it's about that negotiation skill and mediation. Where there's relationships broken in a house, somebody's living with a family, we try to do mediation there to try and see if we can keep them and try and sort out the issues. But in addition, the services that we provide discretionary housing payments and also household support funds combined with providing sustainable repayment plans with the residents, the agreement, but also looking at giving them advice around budgeting, debt management, but also providing employment support where relevant for those who need it. We also work in partnership as well with our Job Centre Plus in Hammersmith, Fulham, the Hammersmith and Fulham Law Centre. We work very closely with Citizen Advice Bureau on some of the cases, and it's really to sort of try and do that prevention and resolution of individuals becoming homeless. Just to sort of share, as I say, on the next page, just sort of gives you an overview of our KPIs, some of our headline KPIs. We have a target of 6% of homeless cases in prevention. We've achieved so far up to August 62%. And then 50% of our prevention cases closed within 56 days. As I mentioned earlier, the target's 50%. At that time, we're at 45%, which is below target. And as I said, due to the volume of demand, but also where we are trying to chase residents, providing relevant information to assess, sometimes take longer. However, there is a pilot taking place in order to improve that we are actually ring fencing, having dedicated staff to sort of do more preventative stuff. And we have staff who are going to be working on cases to try and reduce the response time below the 56 days. We know that the anxiety it causes residents, and speaking to residents personally myself, we need to be a bit more proactive in doing more of case management much more quicker, but also getting the relevant information from the residents, etc. And it's not just necessarily residents, it could may well be medical information as well we're waiting for, because some of the cases are complex. So we are doing a pilot around that to see how that works. Working with the staff have been heavily involved in changing this pilot to see how it works because they realise the demand of the service is becoming quite stressful for individuals. So we're doing a bit of a pilot around that. In addition to that, Alice, we as Hammersmith Fulham, we are part of the West London sort of benchmarking group, and we have been sort of benchmarking to see what other local authorities are doing in West London around homelessness prevention stuff. And we are learning from other local authorities. So we are in the process of strength basing our toolkit around early intervention and prevention stuff, enabling frontline staff to be more empowered to make decisions, but early interventions, etc. So that's being worked upon, and that will be rolled out in the next few weeks to all of the staff to make sure they have further tools. And then we'll be rolling that out to our housing officers as well as part of that toolkit, so they have some more prevention tools. It is going to be a challenge to do that because obviously it's about negotiation skills, it's the sensitivity when you're dealing with residents, and it's more so about being empathetic and listening and trying to find some the right intervention for the individual residents in order to try and reduce those present themselves as homeless.
Thank you very much. Before I just pass questions to the members, can I just ask you that at this time last year, your team were predicting an increase in need in the borough, and I just wondered if you could tell me how does the actual situation compare with the scenarios that the team was working with back then?
I think the demand is much more greater. It is, and the case volume and the complexity of the cases are much more complex. They're not very straightforward. We are seeing people present themselves with mental health, underlying medical conditions, or relationship breakdowns. So it's far more challenging than how it was last year. And also, given the cost of living crisis we're in, interest rates have gone up, CPI has gone up. We are seeing impact with landlords, potentially moving from private rent sector to doing it more privately because obviously they can make more money. So there are various different things that are becoming more challenging, and people getting evicted from their properties, etc., than last year.
Thank you. So one of the concerns the committee had last year was looking at kind of the increase was how resources were going to be stretched. So human resources and budget and how are the team kind of coping with that increase?
So we've put some extra resources in. We've put some extra resources in to help out on the advice line. We've put another 6 more staff on a fixed term contract over this year to help out on the front line to free up the more specialist staff to deal with case management. And we've taken on a couple of more additional case handlers to deal with the assessments to help clear the backlog we have. It's a very challenging job. It's very demanding. Hammersmith Fulham not the only local authority. When I've spoken to my peer colleagues at other local authorities, everyone is having that same challenge around workforce, people feeling stressed out, etc., and being more resilient based on the demands. What Alice is doing and myself, we are supporting the staff on the ground who are dealing with those cases, but we are listening to them in how we can further improve the services. And we are looking at doing a bit of service realignment in changing the way how the service is operated for next year. So it's suitable in preparation for further growth and capacity and demand.
Thank you, Roy. John, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just to add, Roy just finished on it, but you know, we're currently working closely as the economy department with finance on an evidence-based approach around a budget assessment for next year. These sort of services from the general fund, and holding sessions with members, including Councillor Ree, around that assessment. So that work is in progress for next year, and we are conscious in that work of our own modelling, also the wider situation across London in terms of kind of increased demand, potential knock-on effects that could have, and also, you know, it's becoming quite public. There are several councils now struggling for finance in this area, so we need to manage that through very carefully against our HRA revenue account and our financial goals.
Thank you very much, John. Do members have questions? Councillor Alford.
Yes.
I have several, but I'll try not to be too scattergunnish.
I notice in the chart, it seemed to peak in June and July. It's gone down in August. Has it gone down in September, or was that just a blip that it went down rather than?
In August, we saw a slight drop.
Yes.
We did. That could be for various reasons, seasonal trends. But the volume, what's coming through is steady. It is. Apologies, I don't have further updates on the numbers to give you for August, November, but it is steady.
It's steady, is it? Right. Changing subject. One of the things as a councillor, I obviously deal with people who are facing eviction or have been evicted. One of the things that has come through, and it's come through particularly this week, I've had 3 cases, is people who have gone, well, or who, I believe, have assured me they've been to advice from the council, and it's not been stressed to them that by leaving before the eviction or the eviction notice is served, they make themselves intentionally homeless, which of course weakens their case, doesn't it? People should remain till the due process. That message doesn't seem to be getting through. I've had 3 different cases, and I've said to the people, but the whole point is you must stay there through the whole process.
So we do offer that, and we do recommend that, and it depends on case by case situation, but that is part of the sort of
But is it stressed to them how important?
It is stressed them importance, but we can tell them this is what they need to do, and they have their rights, and then we do advise them if they don't agree with what we're saying, to speak to citizens advice, because they will get the same assurance from citizens advice. So we do advise that.
Because I've got 3 cases of people who have, by not going through the process, have put them, have ended up in difficult circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the final question is, you've done 2 very interesting case studies, but I'd like to know what the final outcome is. Did both of these people remain in the same accommodation? I mean, because it's for short term, you've managed to solve the problems, but have they remained solved, or have
they have been remained,
or or has it become a revolving door?
No, it hasn't. They've remained,
because as with going to rough sleepers, that does sometimes become a revolving door. And I was wondering, in these cases
have been resolved, and they remain where they are based on the intervention and the support we've put in place.
That's right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Alford. Can I just have a little follow-up on Councillor Alford's question there? Can you tell us, there is a statutory need to prevent homelessness, and then there was an ambition to exceed that. So we had a sort of a view that if somebody made themselves intentionally homeless, it wasn't going to close the door on them completely in the way that it can do in some other areas. Has the resource situation changed that approach to residents?
Our resources, it has, because we've been able to provide that sort of prevention and support for those situations. So yeah, it has.
If they have, as I talked about, people becoming intentionally homeless, what do you offer them then if somebody
intentionally presents themselves as homeless because their landlord says they're evicting them, we will ask them, do they have any immediate family, do they have any friends they can stay with, etc. That's the first sort of point. That's the first thing. If they say they don't, we will ask if they've got any further relatives potentially outside the borough they could stay with. We will look at assessing them based on their employment, with their working, or what benefits there are, and we will probably help signpost them to the private rental sector. We will do, and obviously giving them a choice. It may well not necessarily be in the borough because we know it's expensive, but looking at other private rental schemes outside of the borough, but ideally where they can still commute. So if they work in Hammersmith and Fulham, they're still able to commute also, but it's giving residents the choice, really. And what we do find is some of the choices we give residents, they don't like the outcome, and therefore they escalate it to members, etc. But we are trying to be dealing with cases in a sensitive way, based on case, and it's not always a favourable outcome for those individuals.
And dealing with certain residents, one can understand that they don't always like the choices they are given, and that I appreciate fully.
Thank you. Any more questions, members? Councillor Sadiq?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Roy, for your presentation. I have a short questions. I understand that we are approaching to this winter rapidly, and you said there is a resources we have to use, stretched resources. I understand that. You mentioned the response time. What is the response time at the moment we have for the when someone is a homeless or they have any problems or been evicted or they approach to the council? What is the approach response time we have? Like, number two, what is the backlog we are talking about? What sort of backlog you said? And can you give us more some information about this? Then I'll come with a few more questions.
Okay, so if somebody presents the first part of the question, if somebody comes to 145 to say they're homeless, the duty officer will sit down and assess how they've become homeless, establish facts, and obviously we will then complete the relevant forms with them, or we may sign. They may well want to complete the forms themselves, but if they are actually homeless and they have nowhere to go, again, it's very much what I answered to Councillor Alford. We will ask if they've got any family or friends, but we need to find out the root cause why they're actually being presented homeless. It could be for various different reasons. And based on that situation, let's just say if it's a family with 4 children, for example, they're homeless and we've done all of our checks and balances, we would then have to find temporary accommodation for that individual whilst we're assessing their case, so that they're actually being put up somewhere for a period of time whilst we continue to do the assessment and get all the relevant information for that individual case. And again, there are very there are challenges with that because again, everybody loves Hammersmith and Fulham. However, we don't necessarily have temporary accommodation in the borough, and it may well be that residents are placed outside the borough, which could be up to a 2 hours commute, worst case scenario. So that could be other parts out of Hammersmith and Fulham. And again, we will get residents who don't want that. And then again, that escalates into them not being satisfied on us providing them accommodation for that period because they expect to be in the borough when sometimes we don't have temporary accommodation. We don't have enough temporary accommodation in the borough to facilitate that. The backlog. So in the summer, this year, we had about 249 cases of a backlog. We're now down to 150 cases. And
children, sorry, thank you. Like you said, the children and families, or I will add the vulnerable as well. Like Francis, myself, we both know there was a family evicted by court, probably is a recent case. I'm just referring, I'm not saying the names. And then they came to there's no even temporary housing for them. And the child is going to the school here. Mother is studying and working here within the borough. And then until the late evening, and even they knew they are going to leave the house, and until next morning or after 2 days, they don't have any accommodation. They have to go somewhere by their own. And they was writing to the old councillors, panicking. And so I just want to know if this is the situation, like children involved, vulnerable, or senior citizen involved. And then what is the criteria? I understand you said the assessment is there. So in this case, what is the urgent?
So it would be the same approach. We would carry out the assessment. So given what you've just said, somebody who's disabled or someone who's got vulnerability and they've got children in there, we would assess their needs and find them a temporary accommodation within the borough. If we can do it, if they are homeless and they've got nowhere to go or to stay with family and friends, also we would look at temporary accommodation. And what tends to happen, Councillor Siddiqui, is that we will offer accommodation. As I said, it could be 2 hours out of the borough. They're not satisfied with that, and that's the only accommodation available. And then what they will do is go back to their councillor to say that we've not found them suitable accommodation when we have, but unfortunately it's not in Hammersmith and Fulham. And we do explain to them it's temporary accommodation, in the word temporary, whilst we try and find something more suitable when we finish doing the assessment or so. However, I appreciate residents who are vulnerable and feeling stressed and anxious. They're not happy with the outcome, and therefore things get exasperated and escalated as if to say we're not finding suitable accommodation, but that is because there is a pressure and demand in the borough. We don't have enough temporary accommodation, particularly large properties, to accommodate families of 3 or 4 or 5 people, for example. We just don't have it.
Quick one. I understand that you said it's a 21% increase in homelessness. Can we have any data for this committee to understand what is this 21%? Is that how many vulnerables, how many senior citizens, how many children, how many families, disables? Do we have any graph at least?
I don't have that information to hand, but I'm happy to sort of pull that information, that data, to provide that data. Yeah.
We'll have the next time, hopefully.
Yeah, certainly, absolutely.
Thanks.
Roy, would you mind giving that to Debbie so we can add that onto the minutes as a kind of an officer response? Thank you very much. Councillor Alexander.
Good evening, Roy, Richard, John. Thank you very much for the presentation. When I meet homeless residents or residents who have got severe housing needs because of changes of circumstances, or they're in a position where they're about to be homeless and it's a week by week iteration, have we got a message of hope that the council can give them that I can reinforce when I'm speaking to residents?
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. So it's Richard Shway, Director of Housing for the panel and also for people watching on Zoom. Yes, we do. But as I said, it's a process which we are actually focusing on putting residents first, Councillor Alexander. We've got a long way to move forwards on. The things which we're hearing today are things where we need to look at and helping residents with the issues. I think the other thing is about looking at how we can actually join the dots up a lot better in housing, about how we can actually not just necessarily look at the people when they are coming to end of their issues where homelessness is occurring, but also getting to speak to them beforehand. And that's another area which we're looking at. So we can actually tackle the issue and seeing how we can triage the situation and actually help the resident out. Because let's face it, by having people in homelessness, it's actually costing us more money. So we need to be thinking in a different way of actually helping them and speaking with private landlords and also our own stock about how we can actually utilise our stock in a better way. Councillor Alexander, hopefully that answers your question.
Sorry, can I just add to that, Councillor Alexander?
Yes,
Okay.
if you like to, John.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in terms of that conversation, which is hit the nail on the head, and that kind of short-term approach, but there's also long-term measures in terms of, Matt leads our development programme, so we're building more homes in the borough, looking at planning policy and our local plan in the future, and hoping to encourage more family-sized social homes to come forward, where we have a desperate shortage, as you heard from Roy, of family-sized affordable housing, as do many other London boroughs currently. So there's quite a lot that we're thinking about in terms of the housing service, but also in longer term in terms of our housing stock in the borough that can help alleviate this.
Thank you, and obviously that was an overly simplified question on my part. Could we maybe work up on a message that we can reiterate to people to give them some sense of hope that we are looking after them? It doesn't have to be sort of with great detail, but just something that will that will maintain their spirits and know that we do care and that we are looking out for them. Just on a second question, if I may, Chair. I know the council housing stock and the housing and the other social housing landlords don't have sufficient capacity to deal with the demand. So we invariably look to the private sector, but we seem to send quite a lot of people to external boroughs, and I'm trying to match up in my mind why the private sector demand, the private sector capacity in the borough seems to be less used. Is that just a simple one of cost, or is it more complicated. And it's only really,
So-
it's really for my understanding rather than you needing to give me.
No, I think Councillor Alexander, the answer to that is the rental price in Hammersmith Fulham is extremely high. And the fact is, landlords have said because of mortgage interest rates changed, buy-to-let mortgages, people are changing their product in the sense to do it privately because they know, as an example, this is just me hypothetically saying, a one-bedroom flat potentially could be rented up to £2,000 a month. So therefore, them giving it to us, they're actually making more of a profit potentially doing it privately, and there is a shortage. And therefore, our landlords we have who provide temporary accommodation are out of the borough because it's much more cost effective to a certain degree and it's available. But that's the challenge we're having at this present moment. There isn't much in the borough because landlords are making their own decisions based on their financial situation, what's best for them.
So there's a,
May I ask just a follow-on question on that? Where people have recourse to public funds to pay rents, it used to be the case that in boroughs like Ealing or in Westminster, they had a higher rated value, so the landlords could charge more and get 100% from the benefit system to pay the rent. Is it that the rents that we've got in Fulham are exceeding what people can get from the benefit system, or is it just it's simple that that's not a factor?
I would think it's probably part of the factor, but I wouldn't say it's the full factor. I would say from speaking to my team, the challenges are private landlords are choosing to rent more privately than having referrals from self because they can actually get more rental income. For those residents who are living in the private sector, we do work with them to find discretionary housing payments and enhanced payments, which is sustainable for them to afford to live into that property.
So the rents would be the rents that are being asked exceed what would be reimbursed from housing benefit and
yeah. So I mean, the local housing allowance rates that capped at a certain amount per postcode. So tends to be at the lower end of market rents. Okay, so we find ourselves competing against other actors for those properties, be they kind of tenants renting privately. There's also a lot of demand from the government for cheaper accommodation for housing refugees currently, and concurrently, there's a lot of landlords exiting the sector. As Roy said, buy-to-let interest rates have gone up. There's increased regulation. There's been a number of tax changes for buy-to-let landlords. So the profitability of renting privately has diminished over a number of years. So you have a diminished stock and higher competition for it. And that you know is particularly pronounced probably in areas, as Roy said, with higher average rents, such as H&F.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I just ask a kind of a follow on there to Councillor Alexander's question, and John, your answer then. Last committee meeting in July, we looked at housing standards. There's an awful lot of pressures on temporary accommodation. Temporary accommodation standards have, I think, always been a bit of a pinch point. Do you think that we're managing to uphold the standards in temporary accommodation? And particularly in light of all the issues in the borough with in London, in the UK with damp and mold and that kind of.
I think, Chair, we're starting to look at it. I think Ed Shaler, who's the Assistant Director of Housing Standards, is raising that as an issue, not just to the private land sector, but also to the responsible to Peabody and other local other registered landlords, including myself. And I think that is an area of work which we will be developing over the next 12 to 18 months.
Right, thank you very much. Councillor Siddiqui.
Thanks, Chair. I have a very quick question. Just want to, for the info. Is there any way or statutory way out the properties are empty within the borough or not in use or not rented for the longer period, the council can take within the circle or can rent out for them or force them to for use, because is there any way out?
Councillor, we would love to do that, but unfortunately, not at the minute, unless government changes their way of doing things. I think it's an area of work which is crying out nationally. It's something which we should be looking at. The other thing I was going to say, which we haven't picked up at the meeting, is about our third sector partners, especially about the CAB. They do a lot of work for us to help residents before they become homeless, to understand the situations there are. We are actually also working with the Hammersmith and Fulham Law Centre about understanding some of the issues there. And I think that's another piece of work which we need to drive and develop, so we can understand about the cost of living issues here. We are seeing an increase with families, but we also making sure that we are looking after those people and making sure that we do find priority areas. It is a hard job. The team do a 24/7 job for us, 7 days a week, and they're constantly on the case compared to other local authorities where they've reduced it quite considerably.
Share the work you're doing all is indeed hard job. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much. Members, any more questions? Councillor Ume. Please do, yeah.
Oh, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Councillor Frances Ume, Cabinet Member for Housing and Homelessness. Thank you very much for the presentation and the questions and the comments this evening. I just wanted to make a couple of points just in response, and it's been very helpful, obviously, to hear about the short-term, the medium and the long-term work that's designed to tackle the rise in homelessness across the borough. So, I mean, there's so much support that the service is trying to offer, and obviously offering that in a tailored way, in as much as possible, meeting with residents, dealing with their needs and demands as they come through. Councillor Siddiqui, you mentioned a case that we were both involved in, and just, I know this committee is not here to talk about individual casework. I just wanted to offer assurance that that family is in temporary accommodation and is being supported. In addition to that, I mean, the service has been facing so many different challenges, as many authorities are also facing, in particular when it comes to soaring rents that we're seeing, but also the local housing allowance that's been frozen since 2020 and has been based on 2019 rates. So needing that shift from government in order to recognise actually we're living in an environment where rents are going through the roof and the people who are most affected are the most vulnerable. And while some of the interventions that the team has been working on is sort of helping to counteract that, working with the private sector, working with landlords, there is a hardship fund that the council offers to help supplement rent and support residents. There's more that needs to be done centrally as well to help tackle this demand and this crisis that we're sort of seeing in homelessness at the moment. But I hope the panel and the officers have offered a sense of the work that's happening to really help tackle this ongoing crisis.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ume. Roy, thank you very much for your report.
Sorry, Chair, can I?
Yeah, Councillor Harcourt.
I know I'm not actually here for the housing bit, but I can't resist asking a couple of questions. Firstly, I think I need to declare an interest. You've mentioned the Citizens Advice, as it is now called, rather than CAB anymore. But never mind that. I'm a trustee of the local Citizens Advice. I need to make that clear. I've been doing work with other voluntary sector organisations in other boroughs, and one of the issues that's come up with me very, very recently, they've seen a surge in applications and for homelessness and for advice on homelessness, resulting from the potential removal of the section 21, the no fault evictions. Are we seeing a similar sort of increase here? You may have mentioned it, but I think I may have missed that. Just interested to see if that is the case, and if so, what if anything can we do in terms of trying to change that sort of policy or help with that?
So thank you for raising that, Councillor Hogg. I couldn't tell you. I would have to do a bit of a deep dive and bring that back for analysis to find out what the impact is since that change has happened. But I just know the demand that's coming through is a wide range of things, but I can give the specific if it's specifically related to that.
Okay, thanks. I just thought I'd raise that because it was something that's come up, as I say, it's in from neighbouring boroughs experiencing exactly that. So, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Harcourt. Are there any other questions from anywhere else from residents? Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name's Adiola. I'm a local resident. I have a couple of questions for you. One of the things that we were asked from one of the councillors was about the voids in the borough. And I think, Mr. Shree, you answered that question. And you said that the government needs to change something in order to address the voids within the borough. And I'd like to know exactly what you say the government needs to change in order for the council to do something about the voids.
I think I wasn't talking about the voids. I was actually talking about the situation about what I was talking about, the issue what the council was talking about was, I believe, where some residents have two homes and about how to utilise that. I'm right to say, councillor, if I'm not, I think that's a question you were asking me.
That's right. More than one properties or empty properties.
Yeah. So I wasn't talking about voids.
Okay. Well, I guess my question is directed at voids. What is the council's position on voids and what is being done in respect of those?
John, can you come and explain what we're doing about voids? Which, I mean, at the end of the day, just to let just residents know, we are talking about homelessness prevention, but we can talk about voids. So John Hayden, who's our Assistant Director of Repairs, can say what we've actually been doing about repairs.
So just before you come in, John, just to clarify, you're talking about voids in Stockholm by the council or voids by the
council?
By the council.
Okay, how you doing? John, AD Repairs. So yeah, at the moment, we turn over the voids, which are an average about 57 voids a month. And which are probably used to come in and go out, we refurbish them to decent home standard. And currently we have, through what's called a key-to-key process, 230 voids, which are at varying levels of investment. So some of the major voids, which have, you know, subsidence, structural problems, party wall problems. Then we have standard day-to-day voids, of which we've got about 111, which are working through now, and we hand them back over you know, every month. So we've got a cycle where we're running at about 60 to 65 days for a minor void, which is, you know, could be extensive works, clearances, new kitchens, new bathrooms, etc., etc. And then they, you know, come back into the stock, they get handed over to the housing team for lettings, and then they get let.
Thank you, Mr. Hayden. And if a resident wanted to get more information about the voids, the process, what you've described in terms of the time frame for turning them over and what's actually happening, who the council are working with, for example, contractors, where would one need to go for that information?
So I think, you know, you can send in a freedom of information request into the council. A lot of that information is available on the contracts which we procured in terms of timescales and frameworks. Housemark set out the national key-to-key times for most local authorities to follow, and then we report on that every quarter. And I think they're published, but I'd have to double check. But yeah, so it's not a great secret. It's something that we actually benchmark.
Can I just comment on that slightly? It's often easier as a member of the public just to send in an email asking for information rather than doing it formally through a freedom of information request, where we have to respond in quite a kind of formal way within certain parameters. So, you know, would you be happy to? Yeah,
of course I will. Of course I will. So if you want to, I can give you my email address. And,
we can take that offline and then I'll grab that.
Yeah, that's perfect. So yeah,
awesome.
You just drop it through. That's absolutely fine.
Thank you, Mr. Hayden.
No
Thank you very much.
I've not finished.
We've got a little bit off topic and we're slightly running out of time. We are going to bring voids into the committee next year, beginning of next year, and you'd be very welcome to come back and ask questions then.
I've got several questions about the report that's been written. I'm a resident of this borough. I've been invited to attend and ask any questions that I see fit. I'm not sure why you're trying to move on when everybody else has had their opportunity to ask questions. I'm trying to keep to a timetable. We've got another 2 large pieces of work to look at. Can I ask you to invite you to ask another question and then we'll move on, please? I've got 4 questions and I'd like to ask them.
In which case, can I suggest, Debbie, would you mind taking the questions off Ms. Fadipe, and we'll get you a formal response to those questions?
I'd like to ask my questions in this forum. There's been a number of councillors here who have asked questions. I'm a resident in this borough. I'd like to ask my questions.
Right. We need to move on to another piece. Could you perhaps share your questions with Debbie, and we'll get you responses? But we do need to keep to an agenda. It's a big meeting, and there's a lot of reports to go through.
Is this not a public forum? Why are you streaming this on YouTube? If a resident that comes in off the street from living in the borough has pertinent questions about housing, and I'm not allowed to ask them. We've had many a contribution from these councillors this evening. I'm sorry, I haven't finished. We've had many a contribution from councillors this evening. Comments, questions, things about reports that have been done before. I've come to ask specific questions, and now you're telling me I can't ask those questions. I need to take them offline.
Ms. Fadipe, do you have any questions about homelessness?
All of my questions are about homelessness.
Lovely, then ask a question about homelessness. Thank you.
Thank you. My next question is, what is being done to address under occupation within the borough?
Can I just clarify? So I'm Roy Morgan, Assistant Director for Housing Management. Do you mean what are we doing for residents who are under occupying properties?
Owned by the council.
Yeah, owned by the council. So we do carry out home visits. We do. We have a programme of doing home visits, visiting our residents, and the housing officers will visit those residents. We will assess if somebody's under occupying to encourage them to downsize. We have a downsize incentive scheme that we will encourage the residents to downsize to a smaller property in order to free up the larger property for families on the waiting list or in a need.
And Mr. Morgan, is that the same process for temporary accommodation and permanent accommodation?
It's different. So if somebody's in temporary accommodation, again, those are in temporary accommodation. The temporary accommodation team will do visits as well and work with the individual families, for example, who are children have gone to university or left the home, to have conversations to look at alternative housing solutions for them and to downsize into a smaller property, etc., or into private rental sector, or depending on where they are looking at their housing needs to see whether they're entitled to be on the council's waiting list, for example, to be in the relevant banding to find a suitable property, a smaller property.
Okay, thank you. And then there was some conversation earlier about temporary accommodation costs. I think it was Mr. Tree that mentioned it. He said that temporary accommodation is costing more money. In terms of the costs, where can one find a breakdown of those costs? So as compared to, for example, private renting?
So again, happy to, you can take my details, we can provide that information to you, or freedom of information, what the cost is we've spent so far from the council year to date on temporary accommodation costs.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. And my last question is this. Mr. Morgan, it's one for you or Mr. Shree or Ms. Hainsworth, and it's in relation to page 13 and page 14 of the report. Now, you don't need to turn to it, it's more of a general point, but it's really about your statutory duty to prevent homelessness and how you reconcile that with your housing allocations policy. Now, in terms of your housing allocations policy, the council have a policy whereby dependents on the housing register are disregarded for the purposes of allocation once they reach 18. That means an adult who initially enters a housing register with one child dependent is eligible initially for a 2-bedroom property or accommodation, but is then only offered a 1-bedroom property accommodation once that child reaches the age of 18, irrespective of how long they've been on a housing register. How do you reconcile that with your statutory duty to prevent homelessness, given that your policy is actively making adult or people who used to be dependents, now adults, homeless?
So what, in that situation there, what you've given, and I haven't got the policy to hand, so apologies if I don't give you a full answer. But from what you're saying is if there's a mother with an 18-year-old person who presents herself on the housing register and they're on the right banding and they're living together and that there's a dependency, then we would award them the relevant size appropriate accommodation for them. If, however, they've been on the waiting list and it was originally 2 of them, and then the person is now 18 or become 19, have actually lived where they're at university and they're not coming back, and again, it's case by case on the assessment, then the housing needs has changed. Therefore, we would only be offering a 1-bedroom property for that individual, because there is no longer that dependency need based on case, because that person is actually no longer part of that household, if that makes sense.
Mr. Morgan, let me clarify my question or the scenario I'm
Yes,
talking
certainly.
about. So somebody enters the housing register.
Yeah.
They have a child. That child is under 18 for our purposes.
Mhm.
They are then on the waiting list. Say, for example, the child is 13. They're then on the waiting list for 5 years.
Mhm.
The child is still living at home with a parent.
Mhm.
They then turn 18 and the council turn around and say, we no longer have a duty towards your adult dependent. So therefore, we're going to offer you a 1-bedroom property.
Right.
That adult dependent then becomes homeless. So how can you as a council reconcile your housing allocation policy with your duty to prevent homelessness, given the scenario I've just explained? And it's common in this borough.
Okay, well, I'm not aware of that, because for me, is if the person is at the age of 18 and still living with the parents, then we would be looking at the housing needs to be offering the right suitable accommodation, which would be a 2-bedroom accommodation potentially to living together. But as I say, I don't have the allocations policy with me, so I'm going by what you're saying, and but that's what we would do. And if there is a discrepancy or an issue, what would happen on each case by case, it would then be reviewed for our director's discretion panel, which is approved of assistant directors and the homelessness prevention team case by case to review those cases there, based on that to make a decision against if it, as you've given, if that was the case and the resident appeals against that, we would then review that to say actually based on the grounds and everything else at the director's discretion and the information, that may well be overturned. So actually we're awarding this person a 2-bedroom property, for example. I was just going to say as well is just to point out, Chair, is we are looking to be doing a review around our allocations policy and bring that up to line. There is a piece of work that will be taking place in the future around the allocations policy to be looking at that.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. When is the
Thank you.
review planned for the
Ms.
allocations policy?
Ms. Fadipe,
I'm
thank
just
you.
following up. I'm just following up. When is the
Um,
review planned?
I think we've been,
Next year.
Next year.
we do
Thank
need
you.
to stop for a moment now. Thank you very much. We just take a 5-minute break, please.
Thank you. No.
Thank you very much. So now we're back. We've got our second paper of the evening, which is the complaints management in housing services. And I'd like to ask Richard Shway and Colette Pryor to present this. I think John Hayden in support, is that correct? All right, lovely, thank you.
Okay, so I'm Colette Pryor and I'm Head of Complaints and Dispute Resolution for Housing. We have a presentation to be shown. So when we get there, I'll just talk us starting through it. So a little bit of introduction and background. As we're all aware, we've had some challenges with our repair service due to a number of issues, and this led to a surge in repair-related complaints. Our complaint handling service was not where it should have been, and this led to escalated cases. Ultimately, we had an increase in associated housing ombudsman cases. In May 23, a paragraph 49 investigation by the Housing Ombudsman began. And alongside this, we've also had inquiries from the Regulator for Social Housing regarding consumer standards breaches. Both the organisations highlighted several instances where we failed in our duty to provide suitable accommodation to our tenants, and it also highlighted issues about our contractors. And we've come previously to PAC with our repairs improvement plan. So what have we been doing? So we did look at changes to the housing services, which started in February 22. These were increased in autumn 22, and this culminated in the introduction of the Housing Hub in June 23. This aims to enhance repair service and complaints handling efficiency. And this has also further highlighted the need for a resident-centric complaints handling approach. So I'm going to talk to you through a little bit about the new hub. So the objective of the hub was to establish a dedicated team to evaluate complaints and repair systems with the aim of driving long-term enhancements. So the hub services, where specialist teams converged in a single location deliver comprehensive solutions for service improvement. The core area of focus includes complaint management, repair service enhancement, safeguarding, addressing overcrowding and combating fuel poverty. The unified teams in the hub are the customer contact centre, the service improvement, the business development, and the complaints and disputes resolution team. So this is a new team that sits under myself, and it's pulled together other areas where we were more fragmented. So we had certain parts sitting in one place, certain parts sitting in another. So we now hold in the one team, the stage 1 members, MPs, inquiries, FOIs, SARS, stage 2 and ombudsman cases. And we've got a structure chart that will show how that works. So we've consolidated all housing repairs complaints and housing ombudsman cases within a single team. It's a recall strategy. So we've been applying a proactive approach uniformly across the complaints to ensure consistency and efficiency. We've been cultivating a proactive culture, bolstered by continuous training and support to upskill the team. And it's a more resident-centric approach. We're concentrating on recognising vulnerabilities, enhancing communication with our residents, upgrading our record keeping, and we have regular in-service audits for continuous improvement. So if you see on the organisational chart, we still have 2 very distinct services. So under the complaints and the resolution support manager sit the stage 1s, the members, the FOIs and the SARS. And then under the under the dispute resolution manager, we have the dispute resolution officers who will deal with the stage 2s and the ombudsman. So that we have that independence of investigation. So I'm going to talk you through onto the next slide. This shows our complaints performance. So you can see when we started looking at this in June, on stage ones, we were 12% overdue. On stage twos, we were 67% overdue. We've worked really hard. We actually ring fence cases. And as you will see, since the end of September, I'm very happy to say, we have no overdue stage ones or stage twos. So that's a real achievement for the team. So how does the complaints process work? So in stage one, residents, report their repairs to the contact centre. If they're dissatisfied through any way, due to a service quality or a delay, a stage one complaint can be lodged, and that can be lodged in various ways. The H&F policy states that a response will be made to a stage one complaint within 15 working days. However, if it's a stage one complaint that relates to something that is in the Housing Ombudsman's jurisdiction, we have 10 days. We can extend by a further 10 days, but we do need to respond within, sorry, that's a bit noisy. Yeah. So stage two, if the resident believes the complaint remains unresolved at stage one, they can escalate to stage two. A response for a stage two complaint is provided within 20 working days. We also have times for the escalation, but again, we will look at individual cases. If a complaint is outside the escalation time, which again is 20 working days from the date of the stage one response to the stage two, we consider on individual cases. We wouldn't send somebody back to the beginning of the complaints process anymore just because they missed that time, if it was relevant. So Ombudsman, in some cases, residents have the right to escalate their complaint to the Housing Ombudsman. Our complaints policy is in line with the Ombudsman Complaint Handling Code. So our complaint resolution and compensation protocol, under the new processes, upheld complaints trigger a thorough review or MOT to address and action the necessary repairs, aiming for swift resolution. Occasionally in alignment with our compensation policy, and that's again written with guidance from the Housing Ombudsman complaints policies, compensations are made to ameliorate any inconvenience caused. So our objective on our complaints performance, we successfully cleared all our overdue stage one and stage two complaints related to housing repairs by the end of September 23, and as was targeted in our service improvement plan. The zero overdue stage one and stage two complaints showcase our robust mechanisms in addressing all complaints effectively and punctually. Continual diligence in monitoring all tasks and related issues, ensuring they are completed and approved by residents, underpins our enduring commitment to service improvement and resident satisfaction. So our next steps. So we are continuing to work very closely with our residents, especially those who have gone to the Ombudsman, because obviously there is a service failure there. So we're continuing to prioritise timely responses to the Ombudsman inquiries and recommendations to uphold the Council's commitment to effective dispute resolution. We're continuing to analyse each Ombudsman case to garner insights for preventing similar issues in the future. And we've got now a feedback loop. So we're continuing to communicate Ombudsman's findings to relevant teams, fostering continuous service improvement. So with my team, when we get a determination, we have a meeting and the team have to tell us what went wrong, what was good, and what we could have done better. That's the way they learn. So what else are we doing? So in our enhanced dispute resolution, we're doing capacity building. We're investing in training and resources to enhance the capacity and competency of the team. We recently had some external trainers in, and the insights they could give us, we could never have got. Like one of them actually used to work for the Housing Ombudsman and had helped write the complaint handling code. So his insights and his guidance was really invaluable to the team. We review and refine our process to ensure it remains efficient, fair and resident-centric. We're always looking to improve it. And now we're continuing to monitor KPIs regarding complaint monitoring and compliance. Just to say, every week we report on our performance to a board which Richard and John chair an internal board, and those figures also go across every Friday to Councillor Ume and the Chief Exec. Just one point that isn't on here. We're very focused on repairs. From the 1st of November, we've now taken into our hub and into our teams all Roy's areas. So we're looking to have one service across all our areas. Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks, Marie.
Thank you very much, Colette. Members, do you have any questions? Councillor Alex.
Yes.
Councillor Alford, thank you.
Well, I'm delighted to see this programme. It's still not feeding through. I think there are still quite a lot of complaints that go wrong. And I have raised this with Mr. Shray and various other members of his team. That I know it takes a long time to turn a tank around, but I was wondering if you have a sort of plan of how much quicker you can stop the complaints and the mistakes happening.
I think Councillor Alford, just to let you know, what I call it at the minute, housing is a super tanker. It's not just a normal tanker. And I think from my point of view is that we will always have complaints. We are moving things forwards, but what I can say is that we are now getting other local authorities coming to speak to us about how we've been dealing with that. And that's not just coming from, that's coming from the Housing Ombudsman asking other local authorities to speak to us about these things. So we have been asked by the Housing Ombudsman to speak to other local authorities, including some nearby London local authorities, about some of the issues they've been having and feeding that back. So that shows itself that we are improving. I think itself where we are wanting to do more, we are, hence why we are now taking over looking at housing management aspects of the complaints procedure and process. We will be looking at other aspects of in housing as well to see that we will have one team managing that. But that's going to take, I think, as I said before, it's going to take me a good 12 to 18 months. Things are improving, things are moving forwards, but there's still a lot of things which we need to do deep dives and get it into a stable situation.
And what I'm hoping is that you've got the residual, which is going to take time, and some of these are very deep, ongoing complaints because so much has gone wrong in the past. But hopefully the workforce and the officers will have learned that it is better to address things straight away rather than let things amalgamate. As you know, I contact you about long-term cases which never seem to get resolved.
So, Councillor Alford, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, there has been a backlog of repairs in this borough. That has dramatically reduced in recent months. So the number of repairs outstanding is substantially below what it was in June. And also the age profile of those repairs has substantially reduced. So we are, as Richard said, working systematically over time to ensure that, repairs are done much more punctually, as well as to a higher quality with better resident communication and part of a resident focused approach. There has been a very slight uptick in or slight reduction in kind of satisfaction in terms of the timeliness of the repair recently. And that's because so many repairs that have been outstanding for quite a long time have been done. So we believe that as the number of repairs outstanding reduces and the average age of them reduces, we should get fewer complaints. But But that, is not the only driver. And as Colette set out, that integration into a much more strategic, holistic, and focused approach to how we deal with complaints, and much more resident focused approach is also key to this.
Thank you very much. Councillor Alexander.
Hello, and I'll start by saying Colette, John, Richard and John, thank you very much. It's not so much what I've heard tonight, it's what I'm seeing in the character of casework that's that passes across to me. And I think you are making changes, and those are very positive changes. And the complaints are there, but I regard complaints really as a learning opportunities, and the way the organisation is embracing those has been is very encouraging, and the response I'm getting to complaints is improved. As you say, we'll never get rid of complaints, and nor should we, because we'll be in denial if we ever get to that stage. If I may, in the vein of that, just ask a couple of questions just on the report. And it's not a test, but it's just to get things into sort of some plainer English. We said we are going to be enhancing communication among residents, and I'd like to know a little bit more about that, and perhaps a little bit of detail around upgrading the record keeping and the in-service audits. What sort of visibility will councillors and residents, for that matter, have of the in-house audits that we're going to be undertaking? So, and please, these are not attack questions. These are.
So when we're talking about the communication with residents, that's two parts. So part of the complaint handling that wasn't going so well was where we weren't updating residents. In the cases that went to the Ombudsman, sometimes people were not being updated on a regular basis. That one, by getting the responses out on time and speedier, that negates some of that. Also, we now are monitoring. So if a response goes out, and that they often do because our repairs targets don't align with our complaint response targets via the complaint handling code. And we don't want to be falling foul of the Housing Ombudsman complaint handling code. So we now monitor, the response will go out, however, the officer will keep it on their books, so to say, open, and they will monitor the issues and be the resident's point of contact until that is resolved. And now at the point, this is a further improvement that we recently brought in, at the point of closing the complaint, the resident will be contacted and asked how often and how they want to be contacted. Some people only want you to update them when there's an update. Some people want someone to contact them weekly, monthly, bi-weekly. So we're putting that back to a resident. That's resident-centric, asking them what they want, not what we think they want. And also we are doing some work, and I think it will be going in Richard's briefing, director's briefing to our Housing Reps Forum, some information on complaints that they've asked for. And that's also part of the standards that are coming in. So that's the communication, Richard.
Yeah, Councillor Alexander, the other thing is about speaking to people. We are speaking, we go and speak, and I apologise quite correctly about issues where services failures have occurred, and learn from them and see how we ensure that we don't make the same mistakes. I think that's really important to look at. The other aspect where we've actually looked at is the entire housing service have been looking at the Ombudsman cases. So each individual officer looks at those Ombudsman cases, and actually John Pixton has actually made sure that all colleagues in the economy look at those Ombudsman cases when they occur. I think the other thing what we are doing is that we are putting residents first. That's my mantra. We are looking at what the residents' needs are, understanding what the issues are, and when we can't actually say that we can't change everything, we put our hand up and say we can't do that. but we look at other options and solutions. And the final thing, what we're also doing as part of the Social Housing Act, which is what we've now got now from the summer, is that we are doing tenant satisfaction measurements, which we have to actually, and we are actually now part of being a regulatory approach for a housing service. We have got questions which we're asking to our residents, which talks about repairs. Final thing, Councillor Alexander, just to let you know, we're also looking at the repairs, what we've actually undertaken. And I believe, John, last month, our satisfaction rate was the residents who had repairs, it was 78%, I'm right to say, if I recall, of residents satisfied with the repair which we undertook last month of quality.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. DK, do you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Is us, Councillor Asif Siddiq again. Is not the this time no question is like a comments, no more like a comments. I want to appreciate the team's hard and good work, especially the like your housing hub one-stop shop is working very well. It's good to hear. And secondly, the graph shows like complaint procedure within the last 5 months, within the short period of time, this is the 0% is a great achievement. I want to say really is a good work indeed, is excellent. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I may ask a question, I'm just wondering how closely the repairs team are able to work now with the disputes team. Is that, you know, you were talking very much about the kind of the feedback loop so that you're learning from each complaint that's made and what's happened there. And I'm just wondering how that feedback feeds back into repairs itself, John.
Hello. So yeah, I'm married to Colette, which I can assure you of, and I have been for the last 15 weeks or thereabouts. So it very much is hand in hand. I've started from the point of the furthest service disconnect that you can get, which is Hammersmith, and then work back through. And we're now managing the repairs with Colette's team in terms of her managing the residents and engagement back to a position of in target, which we pretty much are. Same with the stage twos. And then once we get through the stage twos, of which we got around about 100, which we're working through right now, which have been responded to, but, you know, taking the repairs disconnect on the way. And what I'm hoping to do is land somewhere in January where we have very little in terms of the works in stage twos and we're capturing live stage ones. So from that, we're collating learning on the way, and we had some customer journey pieces around that today. It's the same process I've followed for disrepair. It's the same process I've followed for void since I've been here, working back to a position of back in time or business as usual. Obviously, we're rebuilding a structure and an operating team around that because the repairs need to function differently. You know, customer engagement's there. Stephen, who you all know, or you should know, there's a lot of stuff with resident engagement and that. But we've been really focusing on procedures and structure and making their contractors deliver to get back to that 79, 78% resident satisfaction and quality of repair. Once we're back in the new year, because then what we'll do is we will really focus on how it's landing, how it's delivered. Because once we're back in time, and John pointed out the fact that, you know, we have 85% of our jobs in less than 3 months now. I think about 9 months ago was probably 85% for a year and a half or 9 months or whatever it was. And of that, we've got about 65% of the jobs in target, which is, and a lot of them are 20 days, 60 days, because they do vary. Once we get it back to where we feel like any disconnect is local disconnect, we get into local resolution. We get to look at the learnings that embed them with the contractors, do simple things like end of day calls from residents. We'll wrap up at 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock in the evening. We'll have a team that sits there and looks at all the homes that weren't visited on that day. We'll ring up the customers, do the engagement. So we're going in that direction. And we looked at it today, you know, and we're trying to do something different with the cabinet member and the DLO, and just to try and take some pressure off. But it would be folly for me to try and embed service learning until we're back into a position where, you know, we're in control of the disconnect, and we are nearly there. So, but everything I'm doing is hand in hand with what Colette's done on the hub and making sure we bring that back through and trying to work a bit closer with Rye's team as well, because housing's a key part in all this. So we're on that journey. And I think we'll start to see the real benefits of it in January, February, March, if I'm truthful.
Thank you, John. Richard?
Yeah, Chair, just to add that, I think having us all in one location where operations at 145 King Street on the first floor has really improved. So we also triaging through the contact centre where we have our contractors there, such as Morgan Sindel and Mears, in attendance to make sure that we have the right trades going out and doing the right repair and not turning up and saying, we don't, I'm expecting an electrician and the plumber turns up. Those are the things which, let's be honest, were happening. We have changed that. And also, I think the contact centre, we're focusing on quality and understanding the residents' needs. So where in the past, maybe we have looked at more about trying to get the resident off the call in 2-3 minutes, we are dealing with it and looking at the residents' needs first and foremost and understand the situation, and thereby also understand people's vulnerabilities as well. I think it's important that we're picking that up as well. So hopefully we're explaining that operationally, yes, it's John and the repairs team and Colette's team, but there's also other teams behind that team who are actually making sure that service delivery is also focused and resident-centric approach occurs across housing.
Thank you very much. Members, do we agree to note the report?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you very much for bringing that to us. Okay, and our final report is on greening of the housing stock. Now, I'd like to say welcome to Councillor Harcourt, who is the Cabinet Member for Climate Change and Ecology in the Borough, and a welcome to Helen Dell, who is the Climate Change Commissioner for the Borough. I think we've got Robert Kyle presenting, is that right? And Matt, Robert and Matt? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for inviting us back. Inviting me back to talk about something that, as an organisation, we're very passionate about. I think it was the meeting cycle before last. I came to talk to you about our council development programme, where we're building new affordable housing in the borough using land that the council owns, and in that we framed it around two principles. One was around how we co-produce our schemes with residents. The second was around how we are targeting high degrees of energy efficiency on our new housing, and we described the Hartop and Lannoy scheme, which is delivering a passive house classic standard of build quality. Kind of leading on from that theme, today we're going to talk to you about how we're dealing with greening the housing stock. Now that could be quite a broad agenda item, so we've interpreted it in a particular way, and the report that you've got in front of you today, which will be supported by a presentation that not only Rob will talk to, but two colleagues who work in the climate team within the council, will articulate the challenge in relation to our housing stock. So the report starts by setting the carbon impact of council-owned housing. I think it's about 83% of all emissions of council-owned assets in the borough. So that is a substantial challenge. And the report then goes on to describe how we're looking to tackle that through a retrofit housing strategy. So for context, the retrofit housing strategy is being developed alongside a comprehensive stock condition survey programme that's ongoing at the moment. And that is where we're looking to assess the quality of all of our tenanted and leaseholder stock. That's the 17,000 homes that the council is landlord for. So we're doing a stock condition survey at the same time as developing a retrofit housing strategy. And both of those things will feed into a broader asset management strategy. And that asset management strategy work will be starting in the new year, and that will set how we invest our capital resources in our housing stock in the future, both in terms of the quality of people's homes, but in terms of the energy performance of those homes as well, and how those homes and our estates are adapted to climate change. So through the report and presentation, we're going to talk to you about the interaction between energy efficiency of Hammersmith and Fulham's homes, how we transition to low carbon heat, how we do that in a context of tackling fuel poverty, and if there's time, a little bit on how we're adapting the council's housing stock. So with me today is Rob Kyle, who works in our asset management team in my area of the business, and Rob is our sustainability asset manager. We've got Esther, who is our expert in fuel poverty, and Esther Harris works in the climate team. And then we've got Tim Price, who's going to talk to you about energy master planning. So this is their work. I don't want to take up too much of their time and their opportunity to talk. So I'll hand over to Rob, who has now managed to get his presentation on the screen.
I have. Thanks, Matt. Thanks for the introduction. As Matt says, I'm the sustainability asset manager in the asset management team, and tasked with really getting our stock to net zero and adapting it for a changing climate, and working on that strategic approach with our delivery teams. So what are the key drivers for this? I think we've touched on them throughout some of the presentations, but over the H&F's housing stock accounts for 3/4 of H&F's organisational carbon emissions. So a large chunk of those emissions is from our housing stock and something that we need to deal with. As of 2020, it's estimated that 13.2% of households in England are fuel poor, and obviously with the increasing energy bills in the last few years, that is likely to have gone up, but Esther will talk more about that. And as the world begins to change with its climate, heat-related deaths are increasing in the UK and around the world, especially in 2022, where we saw those really, really hot summers. Heat deaths in London went up significantly. So adapting our stock is becoming more and more important alongside the need to decarbonise. So what are we doing? Matt's talked about a retrofit strategy, which is really fundamental to developing an approach for the organisation that we can all get behind to decarbonise the stock and to adapt it. As Matt said, we're still working on that strategy at the moment. It aligns with the asset management strategy and the stock condition survey work, so we need to ensure that they integrate into each other. So what we wanted to talk about today is how this impacts the council policy, or is likely to impact council policy in the future, and get feedback. So the first area to look at is energy efficiency of the building stock, for which we're considering something called a fabric first approach. That links to how we best transition low carbon heating. Obviously have predominantly gas boilers in the stock. Probably 99% of our stock is gas boilers, I believe, maybe slightly less, but certainly in the 90% range. So that's a really fundamental area that we need to concentrate on, removing those fossil fuels. We also want to look at developing a plan for adapting our stock for a changing climate. And then a key enabler of the retrofit strategy is the fantastic work that Esther's been doing on the fuel poverty strategy, which you may have seen recently. So first, I just want to talk about energy efficiency. So I mentioned a fabric first approach there. So the fabric of a building is the walls, the windows, the roofs. It's not the services like the gas boilers. So the approach is to retrofit homes and aims to reduce heat demand and power as far as possible through insulation and air tightness, combined with adequate ventilation. Obviously, ventilation is really fundamental to ensure that we mitigate any risk of damp and mold. So by focusing on reducing the heat demand, this immediately saves carbon, it saves tenant energy bills, and supports fuel poverty. And once those buildings are thermally efficient, it means that they're ready to be transitioned to low carbon heat. So low carbon heating. So space heating and hot water accounts for 79% of the emissions within our housing. So a massive amount. And obviously changing the heating source is really necessary to decarbonize them. The current solutions, and we've got two at the bottom there, electrifying heat, and usually this is done via an air source heat pump, and is likely to be one of the solutions for Hammersmith and Fulham. You may have heard of ground source heat pumps as well, which is where you get the heat from the ground. Obviously, we're in a central London borough, and so we have tubes and stuff that we have to be wary of. So air source heat pump is likely to be one of the preferred technologies. And then we've got heat networks, which Tim will come on to talk about in a couple of slides' time. Essentially, that's when you have a big energy center like a hospital, and then you can share the heat from the hospital around to the surrounding buildings. So it's a really efficient way to be heating large areas of the borough by using the excess heat that's not used in that hospital, for example, and moving it over to a block of houses. So why are we focusing on a fabric first policy, or we're considering a fabric first policy? So transitioning to low carbon heating accounts for 75% of the cost of decarbonisation, going from left to right there. If it's not well insulated, an electrically heated building can increase energy bills. Air source heat pumps and district heating work most efficiently in well insulated buildings. And as I've talked about, a fabric first approach will result in reduced emissions and support fuel poverty. Also, 70% of our boilers do reach the end of life. Sorry, 70% of our boilers do not reach the end of their useful life for 5 years. And most of the government grant funding is focused on a fabric first approach at the moment. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Tim to talk about some of the strategic work he's doing on the Clean Heat Master Plan.
Thank you, Rob, and apologies. I'm at the dregs of a cold at the moment, but yeah, we've been doing quite a lot of work on heat master planning, and particularly on what the lowest cost and lowest carbon way is to decarbonize the heat for our housing stock that Rob's just been talking about. And it's not just for housing that this is important, it's important for all the buildings in the borough, and it's one of the biggest source of direct carbon emissions we have in Hammersmith and Fulham. So we're not getting anywhere near to net zero without decarbonising our heat. We've just been working with the GLA and with RBKC to carry out a heat master plan and to carry out some economic modelling on what the lowest cost way of transitioning to low carbon heat is. And basically that, and I can share that with anyone who's interested, but that is pretty clear that in most of Hammersmith and Fulham, including pretty much, I think, all the areas where we have significant social housing, heat networks are likely to be the most cost effective and probably the lowest carbon as well, because there's always a carbon cost in terms of things like embodied carbon and the electricity you use as well. It's not immediately zero carbon. Heat networks, and Rob was explaining there what heat networks are, the idea of using a big heat source or even several heat sources and networking them together, and then using those with big economies of scale to supply lots of buildings at once. And it lets you exploit heat sources that wouldn't be viable, wouldn't be cost effective at an individual building scale. And we're doing that on our new civic campus. We're drilling 2 boreholes to tap into the aquifer. That's something that would be tricky just for one building, just for the town hall. But because it's a campus, because it's a small heat network, that you can spread the cost of that borehole out over several buildings, and that then becomes more cost effective. And we can follow the exact same concept on a lot of our housing estates, particularly the bigger ones. White City, Bayonne, Edward Woods, Chaircraft, but several others, I think, as well, are more than big enough, I think, to be not just viable heat networks, but probably the cheapest way of decarbonising these estates are heat networks. And to follow on from this, so we have this master plan. It's very clear that this is the strategy we should be following for large areas of the borough and a lot of our social housing. We've won 120,000 just a month or 2 ago from GLA to carry out detailed design for a low carbon heat network on the Bayonne estate, where we've got a failing gas boiler network at the moment that we need to replace. And I should also point out, it's not just us working on this. 2 of the largest developers in the borough, Earls Court and Old Oak and Park Royal up in the north of the borough, they're also going to be developing zero carbon or electric heat networks using things like waste heat from data centers. Those networks initially will just serve those kind of new developments, but in time, the developers want those networks to expand out, and that gives us another option and another opportunity for estates quite close to those, such as White City, such as West Kensington and Gibbs Green, to potentially connect into heat networks that are being developed by third parties like Earls Court. Next slide, please, Rob. How might this affect council policy? I mean, this is a whole topic, I think, to itself, and Councillor Harcourt's going to be hearing me talk in more detail about this on Friday. We are very likely as a local authority to get significant new powers vested in us as something called a heat zoning coordinator in a year or 2's time. And that will enable us, that the details are being worked out at the moment by central government, but that will enable us to mandate heat networks in new developments, and should enable us to mandate existing buildings and existing developments to connect heat networks as well. And that's important to decarbonising the borough. It's also important to our social housing, because it means we can catalyse the development of heat networks, and we can leverage in funding from third parties and the private sector to develop heat networks that we then might be able to connect our assets to, so we don't have to do all of that investment and all that work ourselves. Timelines, important to note heat networks are multi-year projects. From when you first think of a heat network, you need several years, you need several detailed feasibility, detailed project development, commercialization. They don't happen overnight, so it's something we need to be instigating and kicking off as soon as possible. And finance, I mean, as with all of this work, retrofits, decarbonising heat. Rob, I think you said it was 75% of the cost. There's a significant upfront capital cost, whichever way we go down decarbonising heat. And that doesn't necessarily have to all come from direct council reserves for our housing stock. There are commercial models out there where you can procure a private sector partner to build and own and operate and run a heat network, and then you buy the heat from that commercial partner. So it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to stump up the upfront capital, but in places I think we may want to, because that gives us the control over the heat network. I could fill a lot more time with this, but I should hand back to Rob.
Thanks, Tim. I hope that, oh, sorry, thank you. I hope that kind of demonstrates where from a strategic position, I think we need to focus and work together to understand what the best approach is, especially when it comes to low carbon heating. We feel that the Fabric First policy is a good way to support our residents in the short term. And whilst we're still working on that, work out a sensible and efficient way to transition to that low carbon heat, because obviously that is important for us to hit the net zero target. I'm going to hand over to Esther now to talk about the fuel poverty strategy and how the retrofit strategy will support the good work that she's been doing.
Thanks, Rob. So just talking about fuel poverty and to set the context a bit. So we're talking about residents that are unable to adequately heat their home because they can't afford to. And this has got much worse recently when we're talking about how high energy prices have been and during the cost of living crisis. So we have 11.3% of our residents in the borough are in fuel poverty. But if you look at the chart here, the map on the left, it's quite widely distributed across the borough. And in some wards, we have rates of up to a quarter of residents being in fuel poverty by the legal definition. So we can also notice on these maps that there are pockets of kind of higher fuel poverty throughout these maps. And actually what this demonstrates is a relationship between where our social housing is and the rates of fuel poverty in the borough. So there is a relationship between those two variables, and the analysis shows that social renters are more likely to be in fuel poverty than owner occupiers or private renters. So in that kind of context, we know that it's really important that when we're talking about the retrofit strategy for our social housing stock, we need to be making sure that that is working in tandem with our fuel poverty strategy and making sure that we're accounting for residents who do struggle to pay their energy bills already and not making their situation worse. So could I have the next slide, please, Rob? So in light of this, we have recently published a fuel poverty strategy. So it came through the cabinet last month. And this strategy sets out the approach to supporting residents in the interim who are struggling with fuel poverty, and actually looking at the long term, how we're going to support them in getting out of fuel poverty. So the actions in the strategy are focused in 4 key areas. So the first of these is increasing our reach. And this is to do with improving how we use data, and relates to kind of what I was discussing in terms of the higher rates of fuel poverty. We want to know where we should be targeting our support, and where those residents are and what their specific needs might be. And so we're building a fuel poverty data set that will encapsulate data across income, across energy performance, and demographic data to make sure that we are getting support to the right residents at the right time. The second action area looks at addressing inequalities. Again, looking back to that map, we can see that fuel poverty is very, very unequally split across the borough. So we want to make sure that the approach to addressing fuel poverty acknowledges that, and considers how the impacts of fuel poverty and high energy prices will be unequally distributed across groups. Third action area is looking at maximising our resources. So there's work ongoing to make sure that we're linking up between different teams, including teams in housing, and other areas of the council to make sure that fuel poverty services are integrated into the wider support we're offering, particularly around cost of living. And then finally, possibly most relevant to the retrofit strategy is the supporting households action area. So this looks at actually supporting residents in seeking energy efficiency improvements, and kind of longer term support to make sure that they can get out of fuel poverty. And that includes leveraging government funding, council run schemes, and also other financial incentives. So if I could have the next slide, please, Rob. So in terms of what this means now and what we're doing to kind of implement the strategy at the moment, Where there are kind of 6 key actions that we're taking within the next year, focused around this winter, to make sure that we're supporting residents. So the first of these is we are running a small energy efficiency measures scheme in the borough. So this is funded through the Household Support Fund, and it will help support residents to make energy efficiency improvements to their homes. They will get free measures and materials to improve the energy efficiency of their homes. And so this scheme is called Winter Ready Homes. We're then also increasing the presence of our fuel poverty support across the borough, and making sure that we're engaging with residents effectively. So we're running pop-ups and energy advice sessions across the borough, and coordinating these with our cost of living team, and also with areas of housing and other areas in the council to make sure that we've kind of got holistic support for all residents. We're also working with external companies to seek funding for community projects, and part of this has already begun with the setup of Hammersmith and Fulham Community Energy. We're also expanding the promotion for available funding. So a lot of our engagement this winter is tailored around promoting schemes like the Great British Insulation Scheme, which is providing funding for energy efficiency and insulation measures to residents across the borough and across England. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be launching the fuel poverty data set within the next year, which we'll use to improve the targeting of our fuel poverty support more generally. And finally, we plan to reach all fuel poor homes through leafleting and broad campaigns, so through social media and billboard advertising as well, to make sure that people are aware that there is support in this area available to them. So the last slide here, just to talk about how this kind of links back into retrofit and how retrofit does support this. So particularly on what Rob was saying around focusing on fabric. This generally supports fuel poverty and the aims of the fuel poverty strategy really well, in that that is the most effective way to reduce residents' bills, and ensure that their properties are ready for decarbonisation when the time comes. We also have the fuel poverty data set, which will be a shared resource between our teams. Housing will have access to it, asset management will have access to it, and that will mean that they'll be able to also target within the council housing stock the residents that are most in need of support. Also, our engagement around retrofit across the borough crosses across all tenures, which also supports the mixed tenure approach that we have to take to our housing, in that there are a lot of leaseholders and council tenants within the same buildings, and we want to make sure we can carry out a kind of neighbourhood approach to dealing with those. And then finally, when we're talking about the transition to low carbon heat, which is obviously necessary for decarbonisation, we also have to ensure that we're taking that carefully, given things that Rob has said about potential for bill increases, and consider that we do have residents in fuel poverty and we need to protect their bills. So for that reason, it's very important that this strategy, the retrofit strategy and the fuel poverty strategy, work together to deliver decarbonisation and energy efficiency improvements to residents. Thanks, Rob. Back to you.
Great. Thank you, Esther. And I just hope that demonstrates, again, around the fabric first approach, which would welcome comments on how we can support residents in fuel poverty in the short term. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to fly through the adaptation element, but as we know, the climate is beginning to change and get warmer. Retrofit can support with that. The first couple of bullet points there I've touched on already, so I'm going to go straight to the third bullet point, which is that it is an emerging priority. When we started the retrofit strategy work, it was more focused on decarbonisation, but it's now becoming more and more in scope, and we recognise that more steps need to be taken in that piece of work. So within the delivery teams, the first step we're taking is incorporating adaptations, the capital delivery programme, and considering upgrades on a case-by-case basis. And then we're looking to establish better data, metrics, and develop policy and an implementation plan for the stock. So as I said, that was initially out of scope, but we've recognised that it needs to be within scope, and we're going to be working a lot with the climate team to develop that policy further. As I say, it's industry-wide, it's council-wide that this is an emerging priority. So it's quite a new area that people are beginning to focus on a lot more. And we want to make sure that we are leading the way alongside other councils. So now I'm going to hand over to Matt, to talk about some of the development work, because adaptation is included in the new developments and some great examples of what can be done in buildings.
Thanks, Rob. And to bookend this presentation, when I came here, the meeting cycle before last, talked to you about how our development programme, some of the projects in our development programme, were addressing the issues around energy performance, of new development, and that the council, Hammersmith and Fulham Council, was leading the way in terms of sustainable design. And Hartop and Lannoy, which I described to you last time we met, has recently been awarded a national award for best affordable housing development under 20 million, and that recognised as part of that award its delivery in terms of sustainability and climate performance. So I just wanted to quickly touch on two other projects, so the next two projects in our development programme, a scheme that we've designed at Lily Road, which is right next to the West Kensington estate, and Farm Lane, which is down near to Fulham Broadway. Now, both of those schemes also hit the Passive House Classic standard. So they're doing lots in terms of being energy efficient, but also they are responding to the issues around adaptation, climate adaptation that Rob has just talked about. So, for example, they sort of hit on three themes. The first being overheating. So they're designed to mitigate the risk of overheating. So that's by the way that the buildings are orientated and mechanical heat flows. They have low glazing to reduce the amount of what we describe as solar gain. So that's heat from the sun, heating up the internal space in a way that then can't be managed. And then simple design features like making sure that the balconies on those properties act as a barrier to overheating in the properties below and above them. Managing water is really important. So we've designed intricate sustainable drainage systems that manage rainwater when it lands on us, and through attenuation tanks under the ground, we are able to store water for significant water events. We've also, in Farm Lane in particular, we've designed a blue roof system which has the technology to manage and intercept rainwater when it lands, and then distribute that to the site to ensure that it doesn't impact on the wider water table. And then through biodiversity. So all of our schemes now, we ensure that the planting in those schemes is entirely native planting, and that massively improves biodiversity in those areas. So those things are really, really important. And then we manage, particularly on these two schemes, the design approach so that all surfaces are permeable and planting, and so water that lands on those sites doesn't necessarily just run off into the water table and cause issues of flooding elsewhere. So that in a nutshell is what we're aiming to do. Appreciate this was a quick fly through from a presentation to support the report. We're more than happy to share, and we will share as part of the minutes, the presentation material that we've walked you through, but we're now open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for Matt, Robert, Tim, Esther. That was really interesting. It was quite a whirlwind tour, I think. I was really heartened to see Esther here in kind of the middle of, bringing fuel poverty to the front of everything that's going on. There's always kind of a bit of a cost versus carbon. Are we saving cost? Are we saving carbon balance going on? So it's great to see that you're kind of tackling that head on, which makes me want to ask a question of, where does heat networks fall on that cost versus carbon scale? Is that something we're hoping might be able to balance it out more?
I don't know if Esther has any thoughts on this, but I think one of the big advantages of heat networks for heat decarbonisation is that they are likely to be the cheapest option for much of the borough. And of course, if they're the cheapest option, that means you can then supply heat per kilowatt hour more cheaply than you can through, say, using individual air source heat pumps. So that in turn will help with fuel poverty. But I mean, as Esther and Rob are both saying, that's not enough on its own. We also need to do the fabric work. We need to do the outreach work to provide a kind of holistic answer to fuel poverty.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I think it's, as Tim says, they will be a much cheaper option for residents than probably a traditional air source heat pump. But it's just about the staging in which we do it. And that's why the fabric first approach that Rob has in his retrofit strategy is so critical to actually supporting fuel poor residents and making sure that we're doing things at the right time.
Thank you. So the next obvious question is, what would happen if we did fabric only? If we put in insulation and stop there?
We wouldn't hit our net zero ambitions, would be the short answer to that. If we did fabric only, we would reduce carbon and we would support on energy bills, but we would still have gas boilers and gas cookers heating and powering our homes, and that's a fossil fuel, and therefore that does need to be addressed.
Thank you very much. Members, Councillor Alexander?
Yeah, thank you, Esther, Tim, Rob, Matt, John, and obviously Robert, because you've written reports. If I just start off, all the residents that I speak to are getting very impatient because they all understand the climate emergency. Nobody I speak to is arguing about that. They all want warmer homes and lower heat bills and plenty of hot water. And we are giving a lot of presentations, but we're not seeing the action on the ground floor. And if I can just bring into, I wrote loads of things down, which I'm not going to fire 101 questions at you. But if I put 3 headings on there, first is the procurement systems and vehicles that you're going to use to deliver this. Secondly is the way you categorise council housing stock, because we have everything from street properties to gap sites, to smaller developments, to smaller estates. And as I was about to scribble a load more, I did see the one encouraging thing sorry, not the only encouraging thing, when you referred to projects for larger Hammersmith and Fulham housing estates. Now that's on the physical build side, but on going back to the procurement and the financial vehicles that you're going to use to deliver this, and hopefully deliver it within people's timeframes, are that 1/3 of our housing stock is owned by council leaseholders, and they are going to want to be involved in both a practical way, and they don't want large projects from whatever saying, well, you can have this or you can have that, but you can't have that. So what are you going to do to address that? Because that 1/3 of the council housing stock, a lot of that is solid brick built and is some of our least energy efficient buildings and some of the most difficult to tackle.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. So I'll take the first point there, which is related to the procurement vehicle, how we're going to address retrofit. We believe that the capital delivery team and the capital delivery programme are the most efficient way to address upgrading the stock at scale and at pace. One thing I failed to mention in the presentation is that we have currently embedded retrofit into our current capital programme. We didn't want to miss opportunities now. So that capital programme is accounting for around 2,000 properties, and energy efficiency works are being done to those properties on a case-by-case basis, making sure that we use the most cost-effective and efficient way to do it, ensuring that the tenants and leaseholders get warm homes and low-carbon homes. I've also got John Hayden here tonight, who is supportive of looking at voids and how we can upgrade our voids using energy efficiency approaches as well, which is something that we're going to look at in much more detail, because we do have opportunities to look at those voids when tenants or leaseholders tenants leave them, to look at upgrading the energy efficiency. So that is another vehicle that we can use. As I say, capital delivery is probably the most efficient and effective way of doing that. The second point, sorry, can you refresh my memory on the second point?
Yes, it's on the larger housing estates, and then moving it down through the different, I think I gave you 4 different definitions of a council property, from a street property to a gap site, to a smaller estate, to a larger estate, as a rough breakdown, but all with different property types within them. And probably most importantly was this idea with the leaseholder, because this is now, you're going to be fitting what you haven't done before, which is to be fitting a fabric to the parts of the building that the leaseholder that owns and is responsible for. And if we don't go about this the right way, we're going to spend a lot of money and a lot of time debating issues. And we've got to get it right. And the capital delivery project will work for, it's definitely the best for large estates, and particularly where it's 100% council owned and it's not invasive into a property, because then it is purely the council's. But where this is going to be invasive into properties, it is going to affect. And as I say, from my figure, correct me if I'm wrong, Richard, about 6,000 or 1/3 of our housing stock is leaseholder owned.
Yeah. Do you want to go? Yeah, go.
It's on the financial rather than the.
Yeah, I understand. So I've just come from Westminster, and did the retrofit slightly differently, but we've been doing the in-flat stock for 2.5 years, as we talked about, in terms of tenanted properties and voids, which is the easy one to do because it's very complicated when you go to, you know, that the right thing to do is what Matt and his team have described there. The issue is that you can't trespass on the lease. So where it's a building fabric improvements on the outside, it's much easier than if you're doing individual properties such as street properties, which I think you're talking about, where we might own 1 or 2 properties in there, but leaseholders might have the other units. So the issue is that when we do, and I don't know how we've calculated yet, but when we do the housing stock and we have heat meters, it will be that they would get larger bills and larger consumption by not doing this. So there's lots of incentives that I think the team could talk around to the benefits of the homes once we start doing it. But the street properties were a nightmare when we started looking at them, and they got really complicated.
Yeah, it's definitely not. I wasn't going on the technical side. It's more on the financial side and the legal side, and how we take people along with them so they're part of the program rather than an annex to it or in opposition.
I think, Councillor Alexander, I think we need to do a bit more work on that, let's be honest. And that's something where we all need to look at. And also the way that we've actually done co-production elsewhere. We need to, we've learned from that, and we need to do things a lot more better. So it is a good challenge for us to look at, and we need to explore on how we're going to do it.
I like that answer. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Councillor Alexander. Any more questions?
Councillor Sadiq again, sorry. First of all, thank you very much for excellent presentation on the subject of greening the housing stock. I have a quick comments and questions. I understand, hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll meet the target net zero carbon by 2030. And is there any thing in the agenda we can review or will be reviewed, the strategy and policy? Is there any time period? And is there any consultation process will be involved to review the strategy and policy and in the future? And if yes, and is there any chances to add the more, there's a 4 key areas, is going to be added more areas, or just that is the, at the moment, policy and strategy, and which will continue for how many years?
Chair, can I answer that question, or attempt to answer that question? It was a broad topic area, Councillor, greening the housing stock. We could have probably filled the entirety of this PAC meeting just talking about different subject areas. So we decided to pick 4, which we thought were related. There are lots of other policy driver implications for our housing retrofit strategy. We're a sort of midpoint in that strategy at the moment. And going back to something that Councillor Alexander said, we're just at the process of having analysed all of the archetypes in our stock. So the point you made about different, infill sites here, we've got some individual properties here, we've got large housing estates, we've got properties built at different times with different strategies for building, and they all require a different retrofit strategy. So our consultants have just completed that exercise that looks at the requirements of each of those buildings. The next stage is we need to understand the deliverability. So one of the things you mentioned, Councillor, is exactly right. It's the best procurement route. So are there the skills in the market? How do we access those skills? How do our capital delivery teams procure those skills in the market? So that and deliverability in terms of, some of our street properties will be in conservation areas, so there'll be challenges around how we deal with insulation in conservation areas. So all of those things are what we're working through at the moment. So I would say, yes, in the new year, there is likely to be an opportunity where we can come back and talk to you about other policy driver implications for this strategy once we've done a little bit more work on it. So I think, yes, the answer is yes.
You are saying?
Yes, there'll be other things if you wanted to discuss other things in more detail. I would say in the new year, once we've completed that work around understanding our asset base and what we need to do on each particular archetype, we can come back and talk again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask a question and just maybe bring in Councillor Harcourt and Helen Dell here. I would like to know what impact could the £5 million green investment initiative have on greening the housing stock specifically?
I think at the moment, we're relying very much on individual government funding, and that funding, as you saw from the slides, is aimed very much at this fabric first approach. And as with any funding, it's always a competitive bidding process. So there's no guarantee ever that you're going to be successful. We have been quite successful, I have to say, and that's a tribute to the work done by what is really a rather small team of people, quite frankly, who are working incredibly hard. We could do with a lot more people in there to do some of this work, to be honest with you. And I'm not saying you're doing a bad job, quite the opposite. How you manage this on the numbers that you've got, I'm really quite amazed. So that's the first thing. So we need to look at other means of generating income. One of the things we've got, and this whole process is a massive wide area. You've seen just part of the complexity today. The other side of it is we're working with the head of finance and the environmental finance team, looking at other methods and other innovative methods of generating income. So one of these is the green investment scheme, which is being launched, I think it's tomorrow. Which we're hoping will bring in 5 million. Obviously, 5 million, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't go that far, but it will pay for individual projects. There's nothing at the moment set in terms of what that's going to be used for. That's to be discussed in the future as we develop this strategy. But the whole process of how do we fund this, because it is very, very expensive. And at the same time, it has to be done in a way, as Esther's been saying, that we don't actually make the cost of living crisis worse at the same time. So we've got to get the two things absolutely working together in parallel. Otherwise, we will end up in that situation. One of the things that we're committed to here is obviously the residents of our borough. If we do absolutely nothing, we'll end up with a massive great bill in God knows how many years' time, which is going to be impossible ever to deal with, and a situation where people, you've seen the figures up there, the increase in premature deaths as related to heat and such like. You've seen the issue around floods, the damage that causes, and the cost. Nobody talks about the individual cost of those floods and the damage and the repairs and all the rest of it that happen as a direct result of that. So it is imperative that we get that done now, but at the same time, to make it worse in terms of people unable to heat their homes. I don't want to get into this heat versus eat particular discussion, but it is very, very, very important that we look at that aspect, I think. And adaptation, I think, is going to be perhaps in many ways, from a personal point of view, in many ways more imperative than some of the other things that we're talking about, which are perhaps slightly longer term. We've seen very hot summers. We've seen very warm, wet winters at the moment. All we need now is a really cold snap. And don't tell me that global warming doesn't mean cold snaps, because you had snow in California last year for the first time in God knows how many years. So all you need is a really cold snap here. And geological history will show that in the so-called pluvial periods, you end up with very cold snaps as well. So that would then exacerbate the whole situation in terms of the heating and making sure that we've got adequate heating. So it's a very complicated and dynamic situation. So in terms of what Councillor Sadiq's saying, yes, it has to be reactive, and yes, we have to be prepared to change and adapt and reprioritise things in order to cope with all of these. Anyway, I mustn't witter on for too long.
Thank you. Helen.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's Helen Dell, the Climate Change Commissioner. So I am a resident and have a perspective on this, having worked very closely with the council now for the last 2 years. And as Councillor Harcourt has just observed, it's a very complex, wide-ranging and overwhelming subject, and we mustn't be daunted by that. And what I want to just reflect on where the council is on this journey. You have Has it broken? Oh, is that better? We have a very dedicated and brilliant team here who not only have addressed the minutiae flat by flat and resident by resident of a condition survey and what to do about it, but they have taken a step back and planned strategically, and not only just in the fabric first retrofitting process, but thinking about the big picture, carbon cutting emissions like on the heat networks. And not only that, but they put a big warm blanket around it and addressed fuel poverty and the people who are in need in that process, who need looking after. So I think you shouldn't go away thinking this is overwhelming and this is too much. I think you should go away feeling that you have a lot of confidence in the officers and the councillors directly involved in this, that they're addressing and working through the problems. And and bit by bit it will happen. We've got an issue about pace and scale to 2030. There are big financing challenges, but they're being thought about. We have to think imaginatively probably in the future about how we procure and contract some of these things. These things will be worked out. And we've got a very, very good team here who I can't say it's been a pleasure to work with over the last few years. They're absolutely brilliant and inspiring people. And if you don't know them, you should really spend some time with them. And I think, and going back to your counsellors, you obviously face people come to you with problems. I think it's very easy to share those problems and not think about, the process behind them and why they've come to you in the first place. So, it's a big subject. Everybody needs to get on top of it and get their heads around it. There's lots of people here who will help you with that, but, the answers are there. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Councillor Siddiqui.
Thank you. I would like to appreciate the team. Niche team is doing excellent work and it is appreciable. But in the same time, can I ask this, is there anything in place like a feedback from the residents, the work we are doing, or any data or any policy or anything we can see year by year, what is going on, how the residents are thinking about this? Do you think or we can start this? Thanks.
So in relation to the retrofit work, we have gone to a leaseholder forum to talk about, get views from leaseholders on what they would like to see. And I think Councillor Alexander touched on it, is that they want to see, progress, they want to see pace, but they will also want warm homes that are affordable, that have lots of hot water. So yeah, we're definitely getting that feedback, and we're due to go to the Tenants Association very soon. I know the climate team, we don't have the climate engagement lead with us here today, but since the climate emergency was declared back in 2019, we have been engaging with residents, telling them what we intend to do as a council, but also recognising that, as Helen said, this is a really complex issue that we need to address and we need to be careful about, because we can impact residents in adverse ways, and we don't want to do that. We want to reduce fuel poverty, but we also want to reduce carbon emissions and adapt our homes for a changing climate. So we have been engaging with them. They're aware of the climate change and ecology strategy, and they will be aware of the retrofit strategy once we've worked out the final approach within the teams, making sure that everything is addressed as we need it to be. We'll obviously make sure that we get the feedback from the residents to ensure they're comfortable with what we intend to do. Once we've incorporated that feedback, we can then hopefully get it embedded within the council.
Thank you for your excellent work, and feedback is really important, and fully appreciate and support that work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we are getting quite late, but I've got a resident here who'd like to just ask a question. Ms. Thomas. Marie, they can't hear you at home unless you use a microphone. So it's the Zoom participants that
Zoom to myself.
Thank you.
I listened attentively at the last cabinet meeting on the 16th of the 10th, and they did speak about climate change and fuel poverty. My question is, I listened to your presentation. What is the C standard? Because that was mentioned in the meeting, in the cabinet meeting, that we're hoping to get all our homes up to the C standard. So that's one question. I live on a fairly well-managed estate. Our windows have been done since 1988. We are talking about saving energy. We are losing energy on Lancaster, on Swan and Ravensworth Court in Lancaster Estate. We do not want any entry phones. We would like windows and our roof repaired so that we are part of the climate change that is happening now. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Would an officer like to respond?
Thank you for the question. So the EPCC is Energy Performance Certificate. So level C, Energy Performance Certificate is effectively how much it costs to run your property. And that's linked to energy efficiency as well. So an EPCC is the government target, and by 2030 they want all social houses to be EPCC. So on average, Hammersmith and Fulham has a rating of a high D at the moment. So we're almost achieving that. With the work that we're doing, some properties might not. It's an average. Yeah, I understand. I'll come on to answer the rest of your question. The work that we're doing on the retrofit strategy will set targets for our buildings. At the moment, as I say, it's still being discussed with Councillor Harcourt and various relevant delivery teams. We're looking at or considering an average of EPCB. So we aim to get all of the properties in Hammersmith and Fulham to an average EPCB. In relation to the windows and the roofs, that's exactly the types of things that we will be addressing as part of the capital programme. I can't say I didn't catch your state, but I'm not. Okay. I think we'll have to take that away because I'm
not the whole of, sorry, Chair, not the whole of Lancaster Court. Lancaster 1 to 166 is in a better state than Swan and Ravensworth Court. That's what I want the emphasis on, not the whole of Lancaster Court, Swan and Ravensworth Court.
Thank you. Richard, would you like to pick up that?
So Marie, one of the things what we have started to restart to do through Matt's team is do the stock condition surveys, which we haven't done for a long time, as you know. And that way we will then be able to analyze where the areas of need is, such as we will then be looking at doing roofing, and then we'll be looking at windows. So that is coming. Now you're going to say when? Well, it's not going to happen at Christmas this year. I'll be honest with you, because we've just started that process. The team have done an excellent job since restarting. Remember, we've had COVID. The team have already restarted since summer. They've had over 2,500 stock condition surveys, which they've gone across the borough. They're continuing to do that. That information will set us to develop an asset strategy, and then that will enable us to look at where we need to actually put the money in, capital funding for the windows repairs. We'll be looking at also for roofing repairs. As I've said to you before, we're not looking at patch repairs because that's one of the problems which we've had in the past, isn't it? So we need to be thinking overall how we actually do our properties in a better way. So this is the way that we actually got to do, and I've got to go with evidence and information analysis, which we haven't had for a long time. So we are doing it, but it's going to take me time, as I've said to you before.
Come to my house and I can give you the information from since 1983. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So members, I think that there is probably more we'd like to hear about on this subject, and maybe go in a little bit more depth in one of the upcoming meetings. But is everybody happy to note the report so far?
Noted.
Thank you very much. Okay, our next meeting is the 30th of January. I think there'll be a focus there on financial strategy and on the housing revenue account. On rents, that'll be in there for sure. And I think a few other things that we've talked about and we would really like to bring in. I'd like to see a report on the housing ombudsman. We spoke about it a little bit today, but it'd be great to bring that back in a little bit more detail. I think there's an area on voids management that we're still waiting to come in. The private rented sector policy would be interesting to bring back. No, we're not going to bring it all in into January. We're going to focus on budgets and accounts in January. But I'm just kind of giving a bit of foresight. We'd like to cover a few more areas. Lovely. That's the end of the meeting then. I'd like to thank everyone for attending and for watching tonight, and officers for preparing those three great reports. Thank you very much for bringing them.